morning, everyone. Welcome to City and State's Hispanic Heritage Month celebration. Our webinar starts now at 10 a.m., but before we dive in, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Spectrum. My name is Ralph Ortega, and I'm the editor-in-chief at City and State, New York. My parents were from Chile. My mother was from Chile, my father from Cuba. I was born here in New York City. And I'm very grateful that we've got this wonderful forum today to celebrate this month and to reflect on these interesting times. And with that, I'd like to introduce, for some opening remarks, Laura Berrocal, the Vice President of Government Affairs at Charter Communications.
Thank you, Ralph. Great to be here. Great to see everyone. Thank you for your time. My name is Laura Berrocal, Vice President of Policy and External Affairs at Charter Communications, also known as Spectrum. So honored to be part of this celebration today on behalf of Spectrum, today's event sponsor. Hispanic Heritage Month commemorates the remarkable contributions of Latinos in the United States and honors our community's culture, accomplishments, and contributions. As a Latina executive who works collaboratively with industry stakeholders and leading national organizations, a key part of my responsibilities is to maintain a level of cultural competency in my leadership and engagement with industry, government, and community. I'm fortunate to be part of a company that understands why this is so important. As a leading provider of TV, internet, and mobile and voice services in an area as unique as New York State, Spectrum embraces the diverse perspectives and experiences of our employees, our customers, and our partners. This mindset is really core to our business strategy and our ability to deliver high quality products and services that really make a meaningful difference for our customers and the communities we serve. Today's discussion and forum has as its backdrop the celebration and focus on Hispanic Heritage Month. Each of the individuals we will meet and hear from today have made their mark on government, working diligently for their respective constituents while proudly representing Latinos across New York State. The incredible and accomplished individuals that we have brought together today know the importance of fighting for equality and diversity because they, frankly, have dedicated much of their careers to fighting for access and equity. So I have no doubt that you are as excited as I am to hear from our distinguished speakers. So let's go ahead and get to it. So our first speaker today is a dedicated leader and public servant who has worked with both the nonprofit and government space. Prior to her appointment by Mayor Adams, Deputy Mayor Ana Almanzar served as the Director of Community Relations at the Mother Cabrini Health Foundation, where she led external relations strategies to advance the foundation's public-facing agenda and promote relations with community organizations and government entities. Deputy Mayor Almanzar also served as Chief of Staff to the New York State Director of Nonprofits, as well as Program Manager of Civic Engagement at the National Association of Latino and Elected Appointed Officials, also known as NALEO. Needless to say, the Deputy Mayor's leadership has been a constant and steady presence as she continues to advocate and fight for equality and equity for all New Yorkers. It is my absolute honor to introduce our keynote speaker, a true trailblazer and advocate, Deputy Mayor of Strategic Initiatives, Ana Almanzar.
Mil gracias, Laura, and thank you. Good morning. Thank you to City and State, New York, and to Spectrum for having me here today. It is a pleasure. I am Ana J. Almanzar, Deputy Mayor for Strategic Initiatives. I am proud to serve under Mayor Eric Adams, who had built a team that truly reflects the rich diversity of our city, including Hispanic leadership. We believe that Hispanic Heritage Month should happen every day, that we should celebrate and uplift the Hispanic community every day in New York City. I am proud to be part of the team that is building that is turning that vision into a reality. My journey to the Deputy Mayor begins in the Dominican Republic. It is often in the classroom that young people hear this famous phrase, "You are the leaders of the future." I certainly heard that phrase more times than I can count as I was going to school in Santo Domingo City. But becoming a leader had nothing to do with my world at the time. I was then 7 years old and in second grade. All I can think of while sitting in my very hot and humid classroom was the long walk home under the Caribbean sun. Growing up in a developing country, in abject poverty, survival was the most present in my mind. My day started with fetching water, a 1 mile walk down the hill to the well, and 1 mile up to the house with a 5-gallon bucket of water on my head. It took me years to realize how much a 5 bucket of water weighs. That it was about 50 pounds. That was more than half my weight. For my family, our family needed that water to cook, to clean, to brush our teeth. The simplest of things took a large amount of effort in the developing world. Amidst all that chaos, and with 10 children to raise and no education of her own, it amazes me that my mother found the strength to put so much effort in our education. I still wonder, where did she find all that strength to have so much hope? One warm afternoon in late May, my mother and I went to my school to pick up my final grade from my second grade teacher. My teacher received us with great pleasure and congratulated my mother and I as she handed my report card. My mother was shocked when she saw my scores. She looked at me, she looked at my teacher and said, "Usted me está relajando? You must be kidding. You're telling me that she is being promoted with this grades?" "Yes," said my teacher, no longer smiling. My mother grabbed me by my hand and rushed me to the principal's office. She told him that she wanted to re-register me in second grade because, according to her, there's no way one of her children will be promoted with such a poor performance. I was mortified. The principal took pity on me and tried to advocate on my behalf, but explaining why he couldn't re-register me on second grade. My mother, who could neither read nor write, demanded my records. It was the longest walk of my life. The next day, she took me to another school, showed the principal my grades, and told her, "I will register her here as long as you agree to have her start again in second grade." The principal tried again to negotiate on my behalf, but my mother wasn't having it. So yes, my own mother held me back in second grade. It was thanks to my new and motivated teacher who will come to my house every afternoon and tutor me under my mother's watchful eyes. He was patient and firm, but caring. He took a special interest in my success, and that made a world of a difference. It does take a village to raise a child, but I am convinced that it requires a community, a city led by teachers, nonprofit providers, civic leaders, public servants, to do so, just like a mother does. I would never be where I am today without the support network that nurtured me when I first came to this country. I was 17 then, and a word away from the 7-year-old child. I knew then that education was my path to success in America. Now, I am fortunate to be overseeing many of those same agencies that helped the then 17-year-old me. Thank you to El Puente, thank you to Hostos. Thank you for making my dreams and hopes a reality. While working at the Mother Community Health Foundation, I heard Darren Walker, the president of the Ford Foundation, say, and I quote, that those of us in the business of philanthropy are in the business of hope, end of quote. When I heard him say those words, a bell went off in my head as I realized that my mother, when she refused to accept my mediocre performance, was in the business of hope. My second grade teacher who took my mother at her word and mentored me was in the business of hope. That this country, when he accepted me and my family, was in the business of hope. That El Puente, when they agreed to teach me English, was in the business of hope. That the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, NALEO, is in the business of delivering hope to the Hispanic community every day. Hostos Community College, Sunnydale High, Columbia University, when they agreed to educate me, were in the business of hope. Mayor Eric Adams, he appointed me as a deputy mayor for a strategic initiative. He is in the business of hope. As I speak to you now, I am in the business of hope. I work to give our young people a safe place to grow and to discover their passion in our summer youth employment program, in our summer risings and campus. I work to give parents peace of mind with affordable, equitable childcare. I work with nonprofits to meet New Yorkers where they are and making sure that those nonprofits get paid on time. To my fellow Latino leaders in the public sector, in the nonprofits, philanthropy, education, the arts, the corporate world, by showing our youth that Latino leadership is the norm and not the exception, you are in the business of hope. I thank you for having me today and for allowing me to share my story. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. What a powerful message. Really appreciate your time. Our next segment this morning is a roundtable discussion that features a group of incredible leaders who prove that in their respective roles, they are not only making a significant impact, but they are a testament to the importance of having Latinos in positions of leadership. These individuals work on significant priorities for their respective cities and have led efforts in broadband, politics, diversity, community development, and so much more, bringing key issues to the forefront, educating others on important matters, and advocating for those who do not have a voice. I'm incredibly excited for what I know will be an exciting and informative conversation. With us today, we have 4 of New York's finest, including State Senator Kristen Gonzalez, Assembly Member John Zacarro, New York City Council Member Carmen de la Rosa, and Syracuse Common Council Member at Large, Rita Paniagua. So if y'all can show your videos. Welcome, bienvenidos. All right, so I wanted to kick off this discussion with a question for the entire group here. So you are each occupying your respective roles right now at a pivotal time in our nation's history. So what does that mean for you as Latinos sitting in these powerful positions? And how do you view professional and social responsibility given the current political climate? And anyone can chime in on this first question.
All right, I'll start. Good morning. How are you? Thank you for having us. It's wonderful to see our colleagues here and our wonderful esteemed host city and state for having us. I'm Councilmember Carmen de la Rosa. I represent Northern Manhattan in the City Council. I'm the first Dominican woman elected to my position. So one of the things that is so important as we celebrate Hispanic heritage and our community is to celebrate our diversity, understanding that the Hispanic community is not a monolith, that we all share unique immigration stories. Some of us are children of immigrants. I happen to be an immigrant from the Dominican Republic, and it was such an amazing honor to be able to hear from our deputy mayor and hear about how she grew up in the Dominican Republic, because it's so similar to the stories I've heard growing up from my own parents. I would say that one of the things that has been so powerful being an elected official of Latino heritage is stepping into rooms where I know that our voices are so needed. I oftentimes, when I meet with young people who are either aspiring to run for office or looking to do something else in the corporate world, I tell them that the only thing that people cannot take away from you is your narrative, is your experience. I served 5 years in the assembly. I congratulate my colleague, John Zacarro, who's there now. And I know that when we were talking about some of the most difficult legislation to pass in the state, it was oftentimes those narratives of my constituents, narratives of people that I grew up with, that I brought to the table as examples of how we could change our state. And so when we talk about professional responsibility, when we talk about social responsibility, for me, it's ownership of our narrative, being able to tell our own stories and realize that it is our responsibility, even though some of us are first, we are holding that door open to not be the last of our communities. And so that is how the model that I try to have here in the city council. I am one of 51 members in the most diverse city council, I think, in the nation, certainly in the history of our city, our first African-American woman speaker. And so for us, in those first, we celebrate the responsibility of not being the last.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman. Wonderful thoughts there. Anyone else have any thoughts in terms of how you view your current role here? Yes.
So it's very current thought. It's because we're also celebrating the very first time a very diverse city council. For the first time, 51% of the council come from the minorities. And that is a very important to our city, so that we're well represented at the government. I'll say that it is very important also to continue to advocate and bring the voices of all of our community members to the table. Syracuse in particular, communities like the Hispanic community and other communities that are migrant communities are usually have represented where decision making. And so it's very important that we, are the people to bring these voices to the table. And it's, as a counselor, I've always advocated for constant voice, that voice advocating for fair process and accountability in government, and most importantly, that we invest in all of our communities so that we leverage on a serious diversity and inclusion being one of our biggest assets as a building block. So things that we continue to work on as we serve our people.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Councilwoman Paniagua. Senator Gonzalez, as one of the youngest women ever elected to New York State, the New York State Senate, and as chair of the Internet and Technology Committee, you represent a new crop of leaders in New York State politics. So what ultimately led you to run for office, and what was the first thing that you sought to accomplish once you were in office?
That's a great question. Hi, everyone. So good to be here. So to your point, I, represent a very diverse district. I represent 3 boroughs in Western Queens, Northern Brooklyn, the east side of Manhattan. And myself, I grew up in Elmhurst, Jackson Heights, Queens, in a single parent household. My mom was from Puerto Rico. My dad was from Colombia, and he passed away when I was just a few months old. And so I really grew up in one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the country, one of the most diverse cities in the world. And that shaped my experience and my political views. And when I had the chance to go to school in Manhattan on the Upper East Side, I started, seeing that the city looked different in different places, that we really did have a tale of 2 New Yorks. And that also got me deeply invested in politics at a young age, because I wanted to ensure that everyone had access to a good education. Everyone was able to, have the same opportunities that especially my mom and so many of us are here for. So I organized at a young age and eventually actually went into working in tech after working in DC and coming back. And I was not planning on running for office, but because I was organizing around mutual aid efforts, public land initiatives against power plants in Astoria, a lot of the folks who I had organized with actually asked me to run for office. And so, last year, I really took the plunge and stepped up for this new district once it was created, and was able to, put together a broad coalition that was representative of our city, representative of this district. And now I'm lucky enough to be in the seat, be chair of Internet Technology, which means that, not only do I get to be a young Latina in the state Senate, but I also get to bring some of that past experience and perspective into the work that I'm doing now. And so what, has really motivated me is bridging those gaps, bridging divide, expanding access to opportunity. And one of the first things I did in the state Senate was work on legislation around expanding access to Wi-Fi for all shelters across New York State, because we know that internet should be a necessity, a utility now. And I've been working a lot on cybersecurity, working a lot now on AI policy. So it's been a really exciting journey. And I'll stop there because that's the long and short of why I ran, how I'm here, and what I've been working on since.
Thank you, Senator Gonzalez. Well, we're glad you're here and congratulations. Looking forward to seeing what you're going to do next. Assemblymember Sacarro, so you've spent 14 years serving the people of the Bronx, including your work as Chief of Staff for Councilmember Rafael Salamanca. So how did all of your work prior to becoming an assembly member actually influence you and lead you to the assembly seat that you now occupy?
Thank you so much, Laura. And I want to just take a second to thank City and State and Spectrum for putting together today's panel discussion. Is so important. And more important, and something I think I need to highlight, is being surrounded by so many Latinas who are in government is really refreshing and an awesome thing to see. But to your question, look, I volunteered for a political campaign in 2008. And it was there where I got firsthand experience in looking and seeing a lot of what people were dealing and suffering with. And a lot of the issues they were suffering with was from, that stemmed from years and years of disinvestment in our communities.
Not yet. We can run the excerpts.
And then, out of those issues, it kind of catapulted me to see and understand the role that government truly plays on a hyper local level in our communities, right? And if anyone knows my story, as a kid who was raised by a single parent and suffered the issues of housing insecurity my entire, young adult life, it really led me to understand the importance of not just being a Latino in government, not just being a young person in government, but really, like as my colleague Carmen de la Rosa mentioned, really bringing forth, your lived experiences to the work that we do every day, right? Understanding that when you walk into a room, there's people who look like you, and there may be people who are sitting in the same seats as you, but not everybody comes from the same walk of life. Not everybody understands the same struggles that we all go through. And so, that experience really led me to taking on an internship in the city council in 2009, where I spent a good time. And then I moved on my career in government onto the Department of Education, where I really worked to fight against the inequities in our school system and making sure that students in the Bronx had a fair shot at a decent education. And then from there, kind of bringing my career back full circle to the city council, starting as an intern, now as a chief of staff to the land use chair, Councilmember Salamanca, where I really got to work in the South Bronx, right? A community for decades that had received this investment, and now is sort of in its renaissance stage and as an economic opportunity and housing, and so many other things. And so, I really, attribute all those experiences really to leading me to a place to seeing that, there's an opportunity and a place for people like me in government, really to bring to the forefront the issues that many of the people that I represent face every day.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I think it's so important for folks to be able to see Latinos in these positions of leadership and just leading by example. So thank you so much for those comments. Councilmember de la Rosa, your work has been deeply rooted in bringing social, economic, and educational equality to underserved communities. Prior to becoming city council member, you also served as an assembly member. So how has your community work influenced your work as an elected official?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. I'm inspired every day by the people that I have the honor to represent. I grew up in my community. My parents immigrated from the Dominican Republic with me as a baby, and we settled in Washington Heights, which at that time was the heart of the Dominican diaspora in New York City. Now I have to admit that most Dominicans are in the Bronx, but we'll talk about that later. We love the Bronx as well. But, I think for me, it's having grown up in a community where, for example, I went to kindergarten in a trailer. that was in the back of a public school, because at that time, the schools in my district were so overcrowded. And still now that I represent this community in the city council, trailers still exist, but most of the trailers have been taken down. And so it is when you see those items that have been generational, those issues that have been generational, that have impacted not only me as a child growing up in a community, as an English language learner, as someone who parents were on public assistance, right? Learning how to navigate those services and then being able to now legislate to fix some of those issues and make room in some of those spaces for families like mine, right? So I'm inspired every day by my community. Housing, and I see our wonderful commissioner on here this morning, is the main issue still in our district. As a city and as a city council, we look to build more affordable housing in our city to try and deal with the displacement of our community at every turn. And so every single day that I wake up in the morning, I take my daughter to school, I drop her off at a public school in my district, and then I come to City Hall. We're trying to legislate or put resources towards fixing those inequities that have existed in my community for generations. And that fight and that struggle is really rooted in the people who walk into my office every single day. Most of them housing insecure, most of them looking for access to have food security for their families, or looking for employment opportunities in order to climb up that economic ladder, right, for their families. And so I am inspired by their struggle to find solutions to those generational problems that have plagued communities like mine.
Thank you so much, Council Member. Very important points. It's always, my family's from Puerto Rico, soy Boricua. And so you always want to kind of bring your community, your family, the next level up. So, as a first generation Latino, you have such a responsibility, and that's what I hear in your message is just, being able to kind of create that new future for the next generation. And that's super remarkable. And thank you so much for all of your public service. Council Member Paniagua, how are you? So you have served as the executive director of the Spanish Action League of Onondaga County for 10 years before being elected as a commissioner of education for the Syracuse City School District in 2016, and then followed by your 2019 election to the Common Council. So how have you used your experience working in community to affect policy and government?
So for that question, and this is it's very important. Actually, when I first arrived in Syracuse 20 years ago, it's that I've been the region. I'll tell you that I couldn't see my people, they were, it was there and it was growing, however, it was silent. Now, 20 years after, we see in the supermarket, in the drugstore, or in the gas stations, you hear them say, things of that nature. Well, it has changed. The of it has completely changed. But when I go back to my work at the Spanish Action League, when I first arrived in Syracuse, I started working with the youth programs. That's what I was hired for at the beginning. I came from Puerto Rico at the time to help them structure and implement the programming, which was in collaboration with the school districts. And then from there, I did that for 3 years and was promoted to as the executive director for the next 10 years. As the executive director, I was able to assess community needs and issues. And it was alongside my team, our team of people, then research and look for the resources, but it would take to implement some programming to address these needs in the community. And as we implement and address the need, then you start quantifying and measuring your outcomes. And then from there, you continue to expand, you make the right changes to started where you maximize all the help that you're giving to the neighborhoods. So all of that was the platform to continue to then build into running for office, because it comes to a time, it comes to a place where this is what are and what you can do as an executive director of a non-for-profit. So that's the next step. How do you bring more resources back into the community in a larger spectrum opportunity? And so that's why I started running for office. My first steps were with Commission of Education, the district, which is one of the only 5 in the state. That it's a district that came with last year when you have over 22,000 students in a district, which is pretty much our number right now. Then it comes with a lot of challenges, and then that, so that's another platform where I learned a lot about how to address family and students' education, and those blocks, so that we could offer our students a better pathway to their future. And then that led for me to run for city councilor at large, where I am right now. And my last 4 years, I have mostly focused on economic development, helping our communities develop their own small businesses and help them engage so that they're successful with their businesses and to implement in the neighborhoods. We're trying to figure out and bring back density where those most challenged neighborhoods in the south and west of the city of Syracuse, which are the most marginalized communities we have here, so they can come again, that part of that prosperity of the city. Housing is always, the forefront of everything here. Unprecedented growth that will come to us, all of this big project Micron. We're more housing so that we're prepared for that change. And one thing connects with the next, and just go.
Yeah, and that's what I'm hearing. And so doing so much on like housing, schools, there's just so many issues as a council member in terms of what you're addressing, and you're doing great work. And thank you so much for that. And Councilwoman, I would also say we hear you. I can understand what you're saying, but it's your volume is just maybe a little bit off. So when we come back to you, we can just kind of course correct. But I just want to give you a heads up. Great. Okay, so I know we have the commissioner here as well. I have a couple of more questions for our panel before we move into our one-on-one with the commissioner. So a question for all of you is, as multicultural leaders, unfortunately, there are times when your authority or position may be undermined. I feel like we've all experienced it in our jobs. Have you all encountered that, and how have you navigated those challenges when you are confronted with that challenge? Anyone want to go first?
I'm sorry, I was right.
That's okay.
It's
Yeah, and this is open for everyone. Maybe Assemblymember Sagarro, we can hear your thoughts on this to kick us off.
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant challenge, right? As I mentioned before, I think that especially as a member of the state assembly, right? When you walk into a room with 150 members, there's people who have 150 different opinions, 100 different ways of thinking, 150 different stories. And sometimes look, one of the things that I experienced over my last session, right, was when you tackle issues of the budget and you start looking to seeing what type of policy we're going to pass, over the course of our 6 months in legislative session, you find individuals who have a responsibility, right, which we all have to understand to deliver for their districts, right? And as a member from New York City, oftentimes it's not, my first line of perspective is not thinking about what other members in upstate and Western New York, are dealing with, or what are some of the issues that they are facing, and what are some of their priorities, right? And sometimes sometimes it's, you know, it's kind of a game of who gets to it first sometimes, or who's the loudest one in the room. And so oftentimes, you know, we can face those challenges in a space. But I think the important part in this, and one of the ways I've been able to overcome those challenges, is really by having personal conversations, listening to people's personal stories, understanding some of the issues that people face, right? I mean, as someone who represents downstate in New York City, I don't know what people in Western New York are going through. I don't know what those the constituents of some of my colleagues are saying. And so being able to come into a space and be able to put our guards down and say, hey, explain to me, talk to me about why you're taking this particular position on an issue, or explain to me why this budget priority is such a big priority for you, and help me understand how I can look and find the fine line, and seeing how I can be supportive, and vice versa, right? I mean, one of the challenges that I can tell you that I have is being one of the very few members who are very outspoken on the issue of charter schools, right? And an issue that many of us face across the city as it relates to education. And so there is a loud voice and a loud consensus of members who may not particularly support the ideas of charter school, right? But as a charter parent, and as someone who has worked on both sides of the spectrum, on the public school side and on the charter school side, I've actually been able to find that having conversations with people, offering perspective, letting them know what my story is like, what my children's story is like, is kind of helpful to making sure that we are keeping dialogue open, and making sure that we're not looking to undermine people, because everyone at the end of the day has a personal story. Everyone has a priority that means so much to the people in their district and the people they represent. And sometimes being able to come together and have those honest conversations, even when they're tough, are really what I have found to be the most important, and being able to make sure that I am approaching this in a way where I am doing my best to disarm people from putting their guards up.
Yeah, great points. Communication is sometimes you think it's common sense, but it's not always so easy as we may think.
Common
Did
sense
either,
is not so common these days.
yes, that's what my husband would say. Does anyone else want to chime in on this question in terms of any challenges you've encountered, how you've navigated through those challenges as a Latino in these positions?
Yeah, definitely happy to add on to what the Assembly member said. Really appreciated, your points, Assembly member, on lived experience and the importance of it. For me, as a young Latina, as someone who's, first year in office, like, I experience these things too. It is oftentimes that folks might try to challenge or push, a perspective that I bring in the space. But I think so much of what I do is really informed by that lived experience. And I'm very clear about my why, as well as being really prepared and knowing, right, we do our work. You were talking about, like, we do our research on all sides, arguments for something, arguments against it. And so being prepared is also part of that whenever I feel that challenge. But really, there's nothing more compelling than that lived experience. So a good example is, I'm on the Energy Committee in the state Senate. I work to pass the Build Public Renewables Act. And, I represent an area where we have the Ravenswood Power Plant next to the largest public housing authority in the entire country. And so we have Asthma Alley in Astoria. I have family members who are directly impacted, who have grown up near power plants, have asthma themselves. And so there's nothing more compelling than saying, I believe in a renewable future. I believe in a greener New York and a greener future. And that is deeply rooted in the lived experiences of the people in my district, lived experiences in my own family, what I knew growing up. And so when folks are, questioning if a just transition makes sense, it's, yes, yes, there's that experience is so key. Same thing, with housing, right? I grew up in a 1-bedroom apartment. I know we have a housing crisis, right? I didn't get to have my own room growing up. And the only way my mom's able to stay in her apartment is because it is, she's been there for 40 years, right? And so it's stabilized, and she's able to, as a paraprofessional, as a teacher, keep up with it, but otherwise would not be able to move anywhere else. When it comes to education, same thing. I went from a school that had, 40 students in my class and a gym that was an empty classroom to an independent school, and saw the gap, saw what a private school looked like, and had a gym that was a separate building, right? With all of the facilities. So I think, so much of like these moments and individual beliefs do get challenged, and it's natural. We work in politics. You can have people from all places, but that lived experience is what drives me. It's part of my why. And as a young person too, I think it's something I share with every other young person growing up in this city, and especially young Latinos, because we're experts in our experiences and our voices are needed more and more in these spaces. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Senator. Appreciate those comments. We have just a couple more minutes before we move into our one-on-one discussion, our next session. So for Councilmember Carmen de la Rosa and Councilmember Rita Paniagua, in terms of when you think of all your accomplishments, which one would you say are you most proud of and why? So if you all, the two of you want to take that question.
You want to first, or so I'll go first. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. It's still a little choppy, but I think you can answer the question. We should be able to hear you.
So I come from the arts. It's my background. I used to be actually a prima ballerina in Bristol, Virginia Ballet. And so arts, I did something I grew up with. I actually started taking ballet class because I was a tomboy and I fell out of a tree when I was 5 years old, and the doctor sent me to ballet class so that my coccyx would go back into place, and that's where it all started for me.
Wow.
So one of my greatest accomplishments, right now is being able to represent the arts community in this religious community, and with the perspective of being economic development conduit for the city, and definitely a conduit that could be appreciated not only in education. And now we're trying to implement a program for the communities that are transitioning back into integrating in the community from the jail system. So it's something that I always had in my heart, and I continue to work with. It's just one of the things that just fills me up with joy and gives me a lot of it's very enriching for me to things like that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Councilwoman. Appreciate that. And what about Councilwoman de la Rosa? We have a minute. You want to give us an answer?
Yes, I'll tell you quickly. It's hard to choose amongst all of the work that we've done, because it's like your children. When you pass a bill, when you do something major that takes so much coalition, so much advocacy, it's hard to choose. But I will say, and I continue to say, that passing the New York State DREAM Act as the sponsor of that bill in the Assembly and the Excluded Workers Fund, with the advocates and the people mostly impacted by these laws, has been my best accomplishment to date.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Councilwoman. And thank you all so much for your time this morning. Great conversation. We're going to move it over to our next segment now. Our next speaker joins us for a one-on-one interview. As Commissioner for the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, Adolfo Carrion is one of the most influential policymakers in New York City. Commissioner Carrion is a brilliant leader, and I'm so glad that we have the opportunity to sit down with him and learn more about his rise to becoming one of, we like to say, the most powerful men in government. It is my pleasure to introduce you, Commissioner Adolfo Carrion. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Laura. Buenos días.
Buenos días. So you've dedicated much of your career to building and improving marginalized communities. What first sparked your interest? What inspired your career path?
So first, let me say thank you, Laura. As a fellow Boricua, I just got back from Puerto Rico yesterday morning, visiting La Familia in near Rio Grande, near El Yunque. And it's always good to go back home. And let me just say, when I see Carmen and John and Kristen and all these young Latino leaders that have emerged in our city, it gives me so much inspiration, so much optimism about the future. My parents came from Puerto Rico in the 1950s, and they came like so many others, without speaking a lick of English, worked odd jobs here and there, very little formal education. It was a very tough time in Puerto Rico. And they started to climb right here in New York City. And, you know, we were in South 2nd Street in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, not the Williamsburg of today, the Williamsburg of the 1960s. It was a rough neighborhood. They were in a sub-basement in a tough area and in a tenement building. We then got an opportunity to live in public housing on the Lower East Side at Jacob Riis Houses. I still have fond memories of, you know, staring out the window, looking at the East River. East River Park was there, the John Lindsay Park. That was our front yard, if you will, along with the FDR Drive. We then moved to a HUD-assisted building on 12th Street and Avenue C in Loisaida. And my father and mother squirreled enough, you know, peanuts away to put together a down payment for a new $28,000 row house in 1969 in the North Bronx, which we considered the country. It was a lot of greenery up there. That was an FHA, Federal Housing Administration supported mortgage. So my experience as having been the recipient and the beneficiary of investment in my family and in my community and the creating opportunity for us to climb up, for my parents who had a 6th grade education in Puerto Rico to both graduate from college, for my father to get a PhD here in New York City, to become a leader in the city and in the religious community, was really the sort of the wind in my sails. I saw that a family could be transformed. I went to planning school. I became a school teacher in the mid 80s. And so I was in my 20s, and I met this, the chairman of the Department of Architecture and Engineering at City College, a little taponcito of a man. He was barely 4 feet tall, a Jewish Argentinian. And he spoke that beautiful Argentinian Espanol with the jotas in it, right? And he challenged me as a young teacher. He said, allow me to come into your classroom and help you teach the curriculum to these mostly kids coming from La República Dominicana, teach through the lens of the physical city. And I was like, what even is that, right? And it turns out that we took 5 subjects in a bilingual environment, classroom environment, and we taught all the subjects through the lens of the physical city, the place where these kids had arrived and were living out their lives. And we start this conversation with them about where they live and the actual physical relationship of them to this global city. You live on the 6th floor, you live on the 5th floor of a walk-up, you flush the toilet, what happens? I asked my 7th graders that question. It was, besides being hilarious, because you could imagine what 12 and 13-year-olds say, what they started to discover was the water supply system, the pipes and wires that supply their building, where that comes from, how the city was built, how their street was laid out, who else is building in this city, who's arriving in the city, when they arrived, where the power centers are, how do people make decisions? And we went from that to how this society is built. And these kids went from being disinterested to not wanting to leave school at 3 o'clock. And I had complaining parents saying, where's my child? I had to get parents to sign forms and say, I allow my kid to stay till 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, because we were building models of the water system, of Central Park, of the bridges, of skyscrapers. We took trips up to the reservoirs in upstate New York to see where the water was collected and how it got here. So all of that fired me up. I went to planning school, and then I got involved in my community. I worked at the Department of City Planning in the Bronx and got involved in my community such that they invited me, the local community board invited me to apply to become a district manager of a community board. I didn't know that we had 75 community boards and 51 council members and the structure of government and the borough president's role and council member roles. And I discovered all of this as I'm coming up. And I said yes, and I worked at the community board for 5 years as district manager. And my host community, which I call them and love them, in the West Bronx, the Fordham section, the Morris Heights section of the Bronx, University Heights section of the Bronx, where Pierina Sanchez is now the council member. She's my successor in the 14th district, several removed. They said, we'd like you to run for city council. And I said, well, how do I do that? And that was the beginning of an incredible journey. And city council to borough president to working at the White House as the director of the White House Office of Urban Affairs with President Obama. I opened up my own business. I worked at HUD as regional administrator. And I had a successful business doing affordable housing development. It was called Metro Futures. That was the whole concept, right? The future of metropolitan areas. And when Eric Adams got elected, he reached out and said, would you consider coming on as commissioner of housing? And you think about it, everything I've done, it's all packaged right here at HPD. The work we do is about community building, about giving people the same opportunity that I got, a platform to start to climb and start to create a place, a space, a foundation, a rootedness in the global city, and to build what ultimately is the future of this experiment that we're still trying to hold together.
Wow. So what I'm hearing is your love for your community and your people is what has now catapulted you to where you are today.
100%.
Very accomplished career path, very extensive work you've done. You've, as you mentioned, served in the Obama administration as deputy assistant to President Obama, director of the White House Office of Urban Affairs. You also served as you mentioned, Bronx Borough President and as former council member. So with all of these achievements under your belt, what would you say is your career highlight?
Wow. You know, I have to tell you, this job puts it all together, right? Because this is the accumulation of my life's experience, and I pour it in here every day. So first, let me say I love my job. But the most important job I ever did was being a school teacher. That is the absolute high point of connecting with human beings and creating a ripple effect in such a direct way. You know, when you deal with constituents, you get the incoming problem, you solve it. It's very satisfying. All of these folks, Carmen, Rita, John, Kristen, every other elected official out there, just, you know, trying to deliver for their constituents. They know that, you know, it's tremendously satisfying, very rewarding, and you know you're impacting people's lives. But when you take a little bambino that is just in the formation stage and you put them on the right track, and you know that they are going to have a multiplier effect on everybody they touch. And to me, that was, and that's why I hold teachers up in such esteem, because they really are the shapers of the next generation. For me, that was, and to see those kids turn around and not want to leave school and be excited and curious. They put on little hard hats, and we went down into one of the chambers, one of the valve chambers around Jerome Park Reservoir. And it's literally like 14 stories down into the ground. It's ridiculous. And in there are these giant valves that supply the city water. These 12 and 13-year-olds that never stopped talking were speechless. And then, of course, they talked forever after they got out, and they just wanted to tell everybody about their experience. It was beautiful.
That's wonderful. And I love hearing that that teaching.
I think we lost.
Can you hear me okay?
Oh, there you are, Laura. Yeah.
It's like a little, like, surprise, I'm back.
Yes.
So with teaching, so I have 3 kids of my own. And I think one of the the most important things as a parent is knowing that when your kids are in school, not only are they learning, but they're in like a nurturing environment. And so that's just, I think for any parent listening to this, and for our Latino kids, like that is just, that's one of the most important things. So great little fact about you to know. I would ask, in your current role as commissioner, how would you define your role, and what would you say is your biggest goal moving forward? You've done a lot, so how do you view your position now, and what kind of goals are you looking for the future?
Yeah, well, look, one of the most important building blocks, foundations for a family is their home, because it's the place that will allow the nurturing of the entirety of the person. The mayor often talks about having a place to sleep comfortably at night so you can nurture your dreams, but you need to sleep comfortably so you can have big dreams. There is a crisis in our city of affordability and access to good, sound, safe housing. You heard Kristen talk about her family's journey, and the fact that her mom was able to be in an apartment in a neighborhood for decades, right? And it gave her a sense of place. Our challenge is to make that place affordable enough for a working family, for a poor family, for a moderate income family, for a family with zero income because of whatever the conditions and vicissitudes that life has visited upon them, but to give them the place where their full humanity can be celebrated and they can then build a life. Right now, we represent 30%. Latinos represent about 30% of the New York City population. We're the fastest growing minority in the United States still. And I often tell people, and I served as president of the National Association of Latino Elected Officials for several years. And I used to tell these 8,000 elected officials at our national convention, you, Mexicano, Guatemalteco, Colombiano, Puerto Riqueño, Dominicano, and you just go on and on, right? You are the future of the American experiment. It is on us to create the next chapter of this great experiment. And we do it by the fact that we're here emerging. There's a river of humanity arriving right now. Look at our city. We have 120,000 people, largely from Latino America, that have come to our shores, come to our borders, have made their way to American cities, largely New York City. We've seen these waves before. And those people ended up in positions of power and responsibility, and in corporate America and in public sector America. They ran for president, they became judges, governors, etc., newspaper publishers. It's on us now, because we are literally taking the reins, and we are not. And I struggle with this. I still see questions where it's like, or a statement, even from some respected sources, that say Latinos are the fastest growing race in America. That is not even a thing. The paradigm of race, it doesn't fit us. We are a multiracial cultural collection of Spanish-speaking nation states around the globe, and that have come to this country with the same belief that there's a place of opportunity in America that's not based on your DNA, your language, your culture, your religion, your sexual orientation, your gender identification, et cetera, et cetera. It's a concept, and we are the keepers of that promise now. So as we emerge, we need to take on these roles of responsibility. What I hope to do, besides building housing, making it affordable all over the city, preserving the housing where my family lives, where Kristen's family lives, where John's family lives, is to provide a little bit of leadership and guidance to the next generation of leaders who will inherit this great American experiment.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And that's what our discussion today is about. It's about, recognizing our Latino heritage, celebrating the milestones. It's an honor to have a conversation with you as one of our leading champions in New York. And thank you so much for your time. And I see Ralph Ortega is here, Editor-in-Chief of City and State New York. So I'm going to let him close us out. Thank
Hi,
you so
Ralph.
much.
Good to see you, Ralph.
You're on mute.
So excited that I forgot to unmute myself. Gracias, Commissioner. Mi gente, this has been a really great opportunity to mark this month and discuss some very important and inspiring topics. I want to thank our sponsor, Spectrum, for hosting this webinar, and all our participants who joined us today for the discussion. I'm Ralph Ortega, the Editor-in-Chief at City and State New York. Please join us next time for our next event, and we'll see you around. Hasta luego.